Good evening, folks. Oh my God, that's loud. I sound amazing. I do. You can all hear the voices in my head, right? Oh, come on, it's a joke. It's going to be one of those talks. It's going to be a little bit funny. It'll help if you kind of smile with me. My name is Niall, and I'm going to be talking about optimistic security, or optimism in security and development, where we make mistakes. We build stuff, we don't do stuff right, and why and how we make mistakes. Now, this is a talk that is very low tech. It's a little bit more psychology than technology, but it does kind of mess with your head a little bit. So by way of introduction again, my name is Niall. I am a strategic account technology strategist at Microsoft. Now, a strategic ATS stands for Account Technology Strategist. So I am a strategic strategist, which means Microsoft is still shit at naming things. Does anyone ever remember Windows 7 and Vista? I work as a virtual CTO. I talk to one particular big energy customer based in Norway, and I work with them and I help them understand the myriad and amount of different technological choices they can make, what they can do, and where to put it. And by that introduction, I work with a lot of information all day. I have to figure out what to do. And I have just realized I'm coming in after the US election with Joe Biden in my talk. I am super sorry. You know, when you get you've been doing this talk, you've rehearsed it, everything's going well, you're ignoring the GIF, you know what you're doing, and now Joe Biden's going, you have two options. I wish they taught. You have so much information to process every day. We have tactile, we have feelings, we have visual, we have senses. All this type of information is coming at us to this giant supercomputer, which we call our brain. Our brains are super smart and super efficient and can do a lot of amazing things, but they are also lazy. Our brains are amazing, but they're lazy. And what they do is they have these shortcuts in them to help you process information quicker. We call these shortcuts heuristics. Heuristics help us deal with the vast amount of information we get every day. If you imagine, so how many of you drive a car? Fantastic. Do any of you remember when you first drove it? White knuckles, sweat dripping down your back, you're looking at every mirror as if your head's on fire, and now you can't remember how you drove to work. You're like, how the hell did I? So, because if you've ever changed jobs and you drive to work and you end up at your old office, that's your brain being lazy. That's shortcutting, because it goes, I know how to get here and I'm fine. We know about all of these different heuristics by these two gentlemen, which is Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. You might have heard of Daniel Kahneman before because he's got a book called Thinking Fast and Slow. All right? It's about critical thinking. These two folks are psychological economists and psychological mathematicians who helped us understand why we have all these different heuristics in our head. Now you're wondering, what the hell do these people do on a real basis? The psychological economist was working out, okay, how do you actually buy stuff and why do you make decisions to buy stuff? And the mathematician goes, I can model that. Now, they were trying to figure out what makes sense for them and for all of us and how we make decisions. And one of the heuristics in our heads that we have is called a fast and frugal tree. And you're all going, I don't know what a fast and frugal tree or an upside down tree is. A fast and frugal tree, for the programmers and developers in the audience, is an advanced if, then, else, if. If, then, if, whatever. It's been a while since I've written code. And it's basically, as you scale down through the different choices, you make decisions. Is it this or is it that? An example of this, you have a television, it doesn't work. You pick up the remote and the TV doesn't turn on. What's the first thing you check? Batteries, yes! I always wonder, would some guy go, did my kids hide the TV? I'm waiting, because there's always going to be someone, I did that. You look for the remote, you have to find, yes, batteries. If the remote doesn't work, or is the TV plugged in? Is the TV actually working? Is there power in the house? Do I just throw it out the window and get a new one? That's how I got my new TV. This is a very simple way of troubleshooting, and it helps you because you go tick, 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 and you get a decision quickly. This works in very high pressure environments very well. When you're working in something like a medical area as a coronary or cardiac department, how do you tell if someone needs to go into an ordinary bed or a coronary bed? Well, if they've got a chief complaint of chest pain, And if they got one of these other ones, if they don't have that, they go into regular bed. And if they do, they go into the other bed. It's a very quick way. It's not very accurate, but it'll probably get you to the right thing very quickly. Fast and frugal threes. What is the most difficult thing we do every day? Now, I asked this in Poland. Make decision making. That's a great answer. I'm going to tell you what the guy in Poland said to me. He says, waking up. I was there. So you understand the joke. I don't know. I was like, did the guy need a hug? And I also said, what is the most difficult question you're asked every day? What is the most difficult question you're asked every day? How are you feeling? Oh, someone loves you. Correct. What are we going to have for dinner? And myself and my wife have a running gag. If she rings me up at around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm like, what do you want for dinner? She goes, damn it. Because then she has to make the decision, not me. Yes. So the most difficult thing we do very often every day is interact with people. It's very difficult. Interacting with people is hard. If we don't know what to do in a situation, what do we actually do? Let me pause John there for a second. What do we actually do? When we're dealing with a kind of an area like this, what do you actually do when you don't know what to do around people? Now, I asked this question last time I was in Sweden. I asked this question very politely. I says, how many of you would consider yourself introverts? Put up your hand. They're not really introverts. Introverts won't put up their hands. I know it's an evil, evil, evil joke. But one thing I explained to the folks, if you are lucky enough to be gifted with different kind of these skills and being able to be extroverted on stuff, great. If you're not an extrovert, how do you talk to people in a group? It's really hard. Well, for the extroverts and other people in the audience, let me explain something, what is called the Pac-Man concept. All right? Have you ever seen Pac-Man? Waka Waka? Cool. If you're in a group like this, it's really hard if you're not good at talking to people to join in. Whereas if you leave a gap, you can join in from the side on both sides. And as people join, make the gap a slightly bit bigger. It lets people join in without ever having to break in. And if you do that, that's a really cool thing to social. Watch what happens when I've told you and I let you do that outside, you'll see other people adapting to that little thing. Because we do a massive amount of imitation when we don't know what to do in a social situation. One of the most difficult things we, as people who are, for example, who don't have a disability, is trying to interact with those who do have one. Like, what do you do? It's very hard. You don't know what the social convention is. You don't know what to do. It's difficult. And psychologically, we just play follow the leader. So I'm going to show you a video of a gentleman here who's trying to congratulate his team, right? And he's just trying to tell his team they've done well. Watch what happens. So here the gentleman's coming down, right? They just tick past by, nothing major. Watch what happens here. Hand, hand, hand. I'll wait for it again. Becomes more socially acceptable. Gets a hug. Now the next guy breaks the mold because he's too close, but this guy comes in, hug, 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 another hug, keeps going. We play follow the leader when we don't know what to do. Now, I'm going to ask while I'm letting him do it. I'm wondering, is Norway and Sweden very similar on buses? When I moved, this is also very, like when you play follow the leader, it's also very local. It's very, you might find that you do stuff that's only in your area or it's in your country. But in Norway, in buses, the thing is, the first person, let's start again. In Ireland on a bus, when you're waiting at a bus stop, the first person who arrives at the bus stop is the first person to get on. Simple enough. Great. In Norway, it's the person who's closest to the door when the bus stops. Screw you guys, I'm getting on. And I found this extremely weird the first time I did it. And I was like, oh, that's really strange. And then I noticed something else cultural. Norwegians don't like sitting beside each other. They will put a bag beside each other and they won't move. And if you ask them to move, they get very upset. And if you talk to them, they get very scared. Does that happen in Sweden? Yes. It must be a Scandinavian thing. How to freak people out in Scandinavia, sit beside them on a bus and chat to them. Especially on an empty bus. Hi. It's a real cool brain teaser. Now, what happens when your shortcuts get a bit too well used? What happens when your shortcuts become the natural path we use every day instead of just a shortcut? Well, we have another word for those, and we call them biases. And you're probably going, I've heard of those, but I don't really know what they are. Well, if we think of heuristics as a simple procedure that helps you find adequate, though often imperfect, answers to difficult questions, biases are kind of this resulting gaps between normative behavior and heuristically determined behavior. And the guy Kahneman goes back, interesting Kahneman say again, cognitive biases stem from the reliance on judgmental heuristics. A lot of fun words. Complicated. Let's look at the Wikipedia one. It's just as bad. But at the end, it says, thus, cognitive biases may sometimes lead to perceptual distortion, inaccurate judgment, illogical interpretation, and irrationality. I could be describing my 4-year-old. I don't have a 4-year-old anymore. I could be describing a 4-year-old. I could be describing someone in love, someone drunk, or someone who is actively a bit confused in their perception of how humans work. We have approximately 186 different biases in our brains. We are so screwed. They are divided into too much information, not enough meaning, need to act fast, and what to remember. When you have too much information, you try and reduce the amount of information you have to make sense of what's going on. Like you ever feel like you're being overloaded by stuff and you just have to close your eyes, or you do something, or you have to take away things. If you've got not enough meaning, we fill in the gaps. People say, oh, if this has happened, it must mean that something else happened. It's kind of correlation, causation type of thing. And need to act fast is like that fight or flight. If something happens, you'll just go, oh, I'm going to do the quickest thing I know how to do fast. I was optimistic when I was building this talk because I started with confirmation bias. Now, confirmation bias, we all probably do it. We just probably don't realize it. Have you heard of Stack Overflow? Awesome. How many of you blindly copied information from Stack Overflow into your code and said, that'll be fine? Because it was sorting the answer you were looking for, and it must be good because it came from Stack Overflow, and we're good because that's the answer I need. Therefore, it is correct. I'm confirming because I'm looking for something, and I'm happy that I found it. Now, the problem is Niall, when he went looking at confirmation bias, could only find confirmation bias because everything told me I was right. Could I find something that told me I was wrong? So I went off and I read about all the other 186 biases we have. That was a bad idea. All I could see was bias everywhere. Nothing else. No matter where I looked or what I looked for, all I could see was like, our brains are crazy. And then I find this amazing thing from Michael Feathers. Once you start looking for confirmation bias, you see it everywhere. Because all you can find is someone saying, yes, you are correct. And what if confirmation bias is just it telling you you're right? Now, I talk about the different biases, and some of them they range from quirky to you are absolutely the worst type of human because you do this. What do you see when I show you this? A smile, happy plug, socket. It's a happy plug. It's a Danish plug. Of course it's happy. It's got a little 2 eyes and a small happy mouth. Now, that is what we call pareidolia. It's a bias that makes us go, oh, we can see faces and stuff. Why does it help us to see faces? Think about it. How do you recognize most people? Face, there you go. I'll just show you my feet. And be like, that would get a bit weird very quickly. Oh, I recognize because of your shoes. Face, and it also is when we're used to a particular facial type, we find other people who don't have that strange, but we also find that we can't make distinguishing features. That's why certain kind of, when you go to other countries and you go, they all look the same. We've all done that kind of conversation, or you all look the same, or because we just haven't calibrated our brains for it. Now, I show you a very happy looking plug, and you start to see faces and everything like a zippy bag, or a very confused washboard. It's really fun. Like I had my kids like just to find me the weirdest stuff you can make a face with, right? Now, when I show you this, what do you see? Yeah, where is it? It's the face on Mars, correct. Did you know that many people believed and were very adamant that this was proof that there was extraterrestrial intelligent life on Mars because there was a face on Mars that could not have been carved by wind and regular things. But because our brains are so attuned to finding faces and stuff, we will. Except it's really just bad shadows and lots of dodgy kind of not high-res imagery. You may have seen these two gentlemen's names before, Dunning and Kruger, but not in this order, Justin Kruger and David Dunning. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a very interesting thing where you overestimate how good you are at doing something without any reference to where the skill level you are at now. Like an IT person giving a talk about psychology. I went off and I thought, yeah, this won't be that hard. And basically 9 months later, I'm still kind of freaking out every time I talk about this. Funny story, I did this talk in Norway, in Stavanger. The person before me was a PhD and associate professor in clinical psychology and biases. She was talking about AI. Niall, the technologist, was talking about psychology. And she sat there and I asked her, I says, I am terrified of coming on after you because, to be honest, you know more about this than anyone else in this room. And she goes, you'll be fine. I won't correct you more than 3 times. Such a doll. I'm like, actually, I talked to her after. She said it was a really good talk, really enjoyed it. That's not to give you any pressure on what to do here. Anywho, the Dunning-Kruger effect is this overestimation of how good we are. We say we might go from 0 to hero in a couple of seconds, and then we go, hang on a second, the more I know, the less I know. And then we realize as we go along, and some people confuse this with people with lower intelligence overestimating how intelligent they are. It's not that. It's where we overestimate our ability to do something because we might have roots in a similar field. Now, I'm going to tell you a very personal story that my wife has allowed me to tell you. And back in 2016, I just need a glass of water for this. Back in 2016, my wife and I are expecting our second child, who's going to be a little girl. And I'm doing a lot of travel, and I'm due to speak in Las Vegas on Tuesday and Wednesday the following week, or in the week, and I was going to travel out Sunday and come back I'll be back in Norway on Thursday. And on Tuesday, before I was due to leave, my wife rings me up, and she is in bits. And that's an Irish expression meaning she is crying and very upset, knows, like, you can hear there's positively hearts going out. And I says, what's wrong? And she goes, they couldn't find a heartbeat. And I went, what? And I said, I've worked in instant response. I've worked with security stuff. And my first thing is not to dive in like a hero. It's more to ask a question. I said, tell me what happened. And she says, the doctor was doing some scans on me and doing some bits. And then he decided to quickly check how the baby was doing, put up on the scanner on, couldn't find a heartbeat. And I went, oh, okay. And I asked a very stupid question. I says, what happens next? And she says to me, Niall, if the fetus is dead, we've got to go to the hospital and I've got to get it removed before it goes septic and kills me. And I went, okay. Now, she starts crying again, and I at this point go, do you want me to take control? It's an agreement between myself and my wife where we both go, if something's going to hell, and one person is out of control or spiraling, the other person can literally take control and get the ship back on the road or on the water. And she says yes. And I says, okay, let me see if we can get a second opinion. I found a midwife who had an appointment free at 9 o'clock the next morning. So we went home, and my wife and I have a very, our son is like, he's all happy, and we're all like, literally like it's going to a funeral. And I'm like, okay. Next morning, I remember Wednesday morning going in, it's super bright. We go in and we talk to the midwife, and she's like, so what's going on? And I said this, and she goes, right. If this doesn't go according to plan, we have grief counselors. And I'm like, okay, thanks. So my wife gets up and she gets on and pulls up her tongue and, puts the gel on her tummy, and then bang. And like, what's that? It's your baby's heart doing 160 beats per minute. Now, every time I tell this story, it depends on who I talk to, but I did this for a group of people, and all the women in the audience just like literally deep breathed in and started getting pitchforks. And I was like, all the guys are like, that's interesting. It's a very different thing. I note this because of the demographics I work with. But I said, my wife broke down in tears of joy and happiness. I was a puddle of goo on the floor. Like, and I get up, and I'm like super happy and super bloody frustrated and annoyed and angry. And at this point, my wife turns around and goes, I've got control. And I went, oh shit, he did. She went back in Friday because she had to wait till Friday to meet him. So she let this venom stew in her. And she went back in on Friday, and she goes, And she reads him the riot act, another Irish euphemism where she called him a whole lot of words I've never heard before and will never hear again. And then she said, what the hell happened? Well, I didn't know how to use the machine, so I thought it'd be okay. Yeah. How many of you now, when we talk about programmers, oh, sure, I could probably write that, it'll be fine. You know, but this is dealing with it. Now, that seems like an amazing explanation of the Dunning-Kruger effect, but it's actually a real good anecdotal fallacy, where I've used a scenario and an anecdote to explain my thing, and you now agreeing with me. I've just broken your brains a bit. I'm sorry. But that did really happen. My kid, my 8-year-old, is a genius at hide and seek. Managed to evade her mother in her own stomach, which we tell her every year that she's very good at this. Now, you may have heard anecdotal fallacies before because you hear someone says, well, you know, smoking causes cancer. And you go, well, my grandmother used to smoke cigarettes made of asbestos and 90 a day and it didn't hurt her. Well, yeah, your granny was a little bit of an outlier there, dude. So don't worry about it. So I thought, how do I make sure I have got all the best information, and how can I make sure that I'm actually looking at real proof, not just anecdotes? Is there psychological or clinical studies done on people with biases having too much optimism or too much things? And believe it or not, there are many. If you ever need to go to sleep, these are great things to read. So I went and I found programming ones where they had different biases that would be found. Now here's 10 different programmers ranging in experience from 21 years down to 1 in different languages. And what they ended up doing was they sat beside them for an hour and remotely watched them for an hour, and it was only 1 hour, so that they could figure out what biases they had. The tireder you are, the more likely you're going to revert to a shortcut to get things done, right? So for fresh, we should be able to identify when people do stuff normally. Now, what they discovered was that in the form of, for example, the developer 1 had preconceptions, said, continually added hash maps to where other data structures more suited to query APIs, because that's something they knew. So they were just going, this bit will always be the same. Have you ever seen some developers who always use the same things regardless of them knowing that it's a bad thing? Yeah, me, I've done that. As I used to use stuff like, and I would just do it the same way, because I knew that tech. We would have and I'll explain about the IKEA effect. It's not a Swedish thing, but it's a really cool thing. But there was another one of, for example, over-optimism and overconfidence. But we also had, for example, the likes of blissful ignorance. P10 disregarded all compiler warnings out of habit and failed to notice a new exception detailing the cause of the build error. How many of you have gone, oh, I missed that error in your compiler? So these things are all different biases. And one of the strongest ones we have is optimism. And optimism is, according to Kent Beck, and I know he's here, Kent Beck noted in his book, Extreme Programming, optimism is an occupational hazard of programming. Feedback is the treatment. Now you can say optimism is the occupational hazard of anything, and feedback is the treatment. I love to cook. I work in cybersecurity. I love to cook. And the reason I love to cook is the stuff I deal with on a day-to-day basis is usually people giving out and being upset that they're being hacked. Cooking food makes people happy. Giving people food and they go, oh, this is amazing, is fun for me. So when we decide we're going to have some friends over for dinner, I go, oh, we can have this, and this. And this is usually where I turn around to my wife and go, am I being too ambitious? And she goes, Niall, we don't need 7 sauces. 7 bottles of wine, yes, but 7 sauces, no. And I went, okay. And that is, I'm optimistic in my own ability to be able to deliver stuff I've never done before, even in cooking, which I know is hard, but I've done stuff before and it's worked, and I can do it without practice, I think. Cool. The problem is that if you talk about anything we've ever done, how many of you have ever said, I could probably write that in a week? And how many of you went, and the narrator goes, it didn't take a week. It took longer than a week. Okay, what is the shortest you've ever estimated and the longest it took? For me, I said something would take 4 days, right? Honestly said it would take 4 days. 18 months later, we finished. At that point, I thought my optimism might have been a bit high and my estimation a bit freaking low. Okay, that's where I've been at. Because your plan is very simple until reality kicks it in its arse. And you go, oh my God, it's going to take a lot longer. Now, the reason for this is because we are optimistically built. Where humans are optimistic because they believe we can do anything, because we can. We just don't know how long it will take or if we'll get it done right. Humans are built optimistically. We have one heart. We have one brain. We have one liver, which, by the way, was designed by the Irish because it's the only thing that regenerates, and we were testing the shit out of it. So that's why it was designed by committee, you know? My brother has 3 kidneys because 2 of his failed, and he's a greedy bastard, and he had to get a 3rd one put in. When we look at optimism, it can actually kill. This is the VSS-2, the Virgin Spaceship 2, and it is surrounded by what is called the White Knight. So this amazing aircraft, what it does, it takes the middle bit all the way up to flight level 41, so 41,000 feet above sea level, drops it, it ignites a nylon burning engine. So it burns Thrumpabuksa, or Pippi, you know, fires that off, accelerates up into space, comes back down, and lands. Now, it has, you can imagine, it's a really aerodynamic thing, right? It's like a giant paper airplane. How this thing stops is really interesting because it has to feather the wings. Now, how many of you, like if you take your hands like this and you push back, that's the feathering technique. If you've ever had your hand outside the car and you're doing this as a kid, and then you put your hand like that and it goes, whoop, that's how it stops. So in essence, what it does, it just looks like this. And when that's its feather technique, and when it's landing, it looks like this. So when it took its first initial space flight, it lasted a total of 3 seconds before it crashed and left a debris field of between 5 and 31 kilometers across the Mojave Desert. Now, when an aircraft like this crashes in the United States, the NTSB, the National Transport and Safety Bureau, comes in along with NASA, and they have to kind of investigate what happened. Funny story, this is actually on Air Crash Investigation, if you've ever watched it, and it's really cool. By the way, don't watch that on an airplane, people freak out. I do, and I have watched people freak out. What happened was then they said, we don't have a black box, but we have all the telemetry because it's relayed back to a station in the Mojave Desert. And this is what they discovered. So hopefully this will play nicely for us now. There's no sound in this video, don't worry. The thing drops here. It ignites that nylon burning engine, right? Now, if you watch the middle bit, it slightly pivots up. And that's the last you see. Now, we'll show it in a little bit slow motion for you, or kind of frame by frame. So it accelerates. And then what happens is the feathering mechanisms are like that. And then it actually pivots up like this. You'll spot it in the middle. And it tore itself apart. So this is kind of the last image of it. They didn't know what happened, so they asked what did happen. The feathering mechanism, they looked at the replay and they discovered that the co-pilot had disengaged the feathering lock at Mach 0.84, which is the same speed you fly over the front to the US from here. So they said, right, but the actual guideline said it had to be done between Mach 1.4 and Mach 1.8. There's about 4 seconds difference between those two speeds. So you're going from the speed 1.4 times the speed of sound to 1.8. 4 seconds, give or take. What they did, they went to the engineers and said, what would happen if we disengaged the lock at subsonic speed? And the person went, it would be catastrophic. It would be destruction, complete and utter destruction. And they went, okay. What do you have in place to stop people doing that? We don't. Why not? Well, we hire test pilots and they're the top 1% of the top 1% and they don't make mistakes. Now, you're probably all going, oh my God, that's amazing. No one would ever think like that. How many of you have never built a piece of software that doesn't have a kind of delete function that nukes it and you just accidentally said, no one will ever press that button? Yeah, we've all done it. We've all left stuff in there that we go, no one will ever do that. And then and then this bug comes and you're like, how the hell did you do that? Oh. Yeah. So they said, we know what happened. Why did it happen? And it turns out very simple. All these people, this pilot and co-pilot work together in 80 or so simulations. Now, have you ever seen an aircraft simulator? It's like a giant video game, huge amounts of screens, everything's all set up. It's awesome. But it doesn't simulate the speed, it doesn't simulate the kick, the noise, and everything else. What they discovered in one of the simulations, the flight got cancelled because the co-pilot forgot to disengage the feathering lock. So, if you've ever been a person who's ever done something wrong, it's in your forefront of your mind not to repeat that very quickly. Now, if you're in a position where you've got to do it in something in 4 seconds, the first thing you're going to do is actually do that piece. And they didn't realize that it would be catastrophic because they thought that there would be no way to do it. And then because the engineers had said, well, they shouldn't do it because we told them not to, they ended up doing it. That is how this thing crashed. And I think one person died at least, and I can't remember if the co-pilot was, I think the pilot was severely injured with brain damage and other stuff. So it was quite catastrophic for a simple, let's make sure they can't do this anymore. The subsequent design changed that. I am going to talk about the idea between naive optimism and realistic optimism. Naive optimism is that bit that we will say 100% they won't make that mistake. Realistic optimism, we assume they'll make that mistake and we'll put something in there to stop them ever doing it. When we talk about security, very often this comes around where we accept and go, no one will try and hack us. Convenience factor. Oh, did you drop something? Or is that very loud? Or do we, how many people believe that none of their systems will ever be hacked? Well, that's good. My mother was convinced one day when she said, I just sent my credit card down to this place in Spain by email. Nothing will go wrong with that, right? I'm like, change your credit card now. People, very often, if they don't think something will happen to them, don't plan for it. Now, the fact is, this is hard to do. Like, how do you change your optimistic into critical thinking? How do you fix something? Now, this is not a jab at IKEA. There's actually a bias called the IKEA effect. Have you heard of it? You want to hear about it? Because it's really cool. How many of you have built IKEA furniture? It's a Swedish joke. Okay, this is like, there's the one guy, I'm not from here. As I call it, advanced Swedish Lego, because, it has different fun games for it. When you build something from IKEA and you make a mistake and it's not quite right, do you accept it? Yeah, we all done it. We have an expression in Ireland, they're swaying like an IKEA wardrobe. Meaning, when they've put up the wardrobe and it's not, and it wobbles a bit back and forth depending on which way door you open, yeah, a little bit too much to drink, a little bit too much wobbly. The IKEA effect is a weird thing where, as humans, we will accept mistakes in our own work, but we will not accept mistakes in other people's work when we buy it. So if you were to buy something from someone and they delivered it like you would build it from IKEA, you'd be going, nope, send that back. However, if we do it ourselves, we're okay with that. And this means that when we're doing stuff like with software and we build it ourselves instead of buying it, sometimes we're willing to accept its shortcomings, even though we know it's not exactly perfect because we made that. And everyone who's now built an ARM or wrote their own crypto is going, yeah. So how do we fix this? We have to train. We have to do a lot of training for ourselves to have constructive and understanding and basically retrain our minds to be more critical thinking. And that very often is we have to look from the outside in. And when we think about this is hard because to be critical of ourselves is hard because we're being optimistic, right? Now, I want to ask a couple of the people, how many people here would consider themselves builders, solution developers, that kind of thing? They make stuff. Makers. How many of you would get upset if you were told you had to buy it instead of making it? Yep. I had that, and this was one of my revelations. I used to work with SharePoint. I was young and I needed the money. Those who worked with SharePoint going, I know. I worked with SharePoint and I had to write some software. I had to get this tech feature where it would create PDF from Word documents. This is before it was built in. And what happened was the project manager said, okay, can we do this? And I said, yeah, it should take about 4 weeks, blah, blah, blah. And he says, is it available as software we can buy? And he said, yeah, it's $5,000 for a license. Now it's about 25, 26. $5,000 is a lot of money back in that day, which is 21 years ago. And I said, yeah, but, and he turns to me and goes, Niall, we charge you out at $100 an hour type of thing. So why on earth would they not spend for 50 hours worth of work and you could just buy this? I went, but I can build this. And he goes, do you want to be supporting this for the rest of your life? I said, no. And he goes, right, we'll buy it. And I said, great. I learned very quickly there is no shame in going and saying, hang on a second, do I need to build this? And go, no, I can buy this. But certain social conventions and pressures will make you do it. And you're kind of like, you need to go back and ask yourself, do we actually need to build this? But if you're going to be self-critical, sometimes you just need to explain it to someone who'll just listen. So you use the duck. How many of you use a duck? I love my duck. My duck is awesome. It's my wife. Because she has no idea what I do and I don't know what she does. But when she explains, I just go, that's awesome. Oh, yeah. I have no idea what you just said. But explain to me a little bit more. And I explain it to her and she explains it back and I get it and eventually I go, oh, I found my problem. She goes, glad I could help. And wanders off. It's fantastic. But she doesn't know what I do and I don't know what she does. Now that sounds mean. It's just that we're under NDAs for what we do. She can't discuss her work. I can't discuss mine. It's great. So we talk about other stuff. What happens when you don't have a duck? You can use pull requests. You can get other people to criticize your code for you. Now, the thing is, pull requests are awesome, but they're not infallible. Why is that? Yep. You watch everyone reading it going, yep. So I found out if you want to introduce a security bug to any single repo, submit on a Friday, 4 o'clock, a 500-line code, and they just chuck it in there, it'll be fine. Job done. Hacking code like a something. We've all been through this. Well, the first thing I do is I reject and send it back and say, listen, come on, man, make it easier. Dude, we can always do what we call a threat analysis. And this is very cool. Now, this takes a little bit of time and a little bit of skill. It explains like what will potentially happen, and we go looking for different bugs. This is a great thing to do if you're a developer, because you can write, it basically is you're documenting your code as you go, and you've done a bit of security work while you're at it, and then you can hand it to the new devs, and they say, here, you now understand how things work. This is really cool to do. The problem is that this is awesome for developers, but what about your project managers who want to know how much money will this cost and why are we not building new features? Well, we do things called risk matrix. And this stands for, this is a red, amber, green one. Got 3 minutes. And what it does, it basically allows us to figure out where we should put our effort. Because if I'm going to be certain that something's going to happen and it's going to have a fairly decent effect, I should probably fix that. Now, I did this in Malmo about 6 months ago, and I said, what should you do if it's stubbing your toe is certain and you're going to do it on a regular basis? And some smart arse said, learn to walk. I said, I'm going to get steel toe cap boots and swing them at you. Now, you won't invest in a tsunami protection because you're probably going to need it. However, it's a very good idea to have in knowing where to invest your time. I'm going to tell you, remain optimistic, but be brutally honest and brutally optimistic. Retain critical thinking. Ask yourself sometimes, when you're making a decision, do we actually need to do it this way? Is there a better way? Am I just taking the shortest path? Turn yourself into a realist. Realism is the optimist goes is half full. Is it really? The pessimist will go, that glass is half empty. How can you be half of empty, will the other argument be? Whereas I'll just go, it's a glass of water. This is a thing I learned from doing security events. I don't care what you think, tell me what you know, show me the facts. And very often when we go looking for the facts, our critical thinking kicks in and we go, oh yeah, I shouldn't have done it that way, that's probably a better idea to do it. I believe, and I would like you to take away from this, that you should do a bit of introspection when you're working on and see where your biases are kicking in. Very often we don't know they exist. But when we do a little bit of critical thinking, when we say to ourselves, hang on a second, am I being right? There is a fantastic bias checker. It's called the Linda problem. And if you Google that, it's great fun to play with it because it'll show you straight away where you go. You jump to a conclusion because based on the information you're given, you assume two things must be true. But that is more difficult than the single thing being true. When you kind of activate that critical thinking in your brain, when you start understanding that sometimes we are just being too optimistic and ask yourself, hang on a second, am I being naive or am I being realistic? Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much.